The morning sun streamed through the windows of Meridian Global Solutions' towering office building, casting long shadows across Sarah Johnson's desk. At 32 years old, Sarah had already accomplished more than most people did in their entire careers, yet she carried herself with a quiet grace that made her approachable to everyone in the office. Sarah adjusted her navy blue blazer and checked her reflection in her phone screen, making sure her carefully braided hair was still neat. It was a habit she developed over years of making herself presentable in a corporate world that often judged her more harshly than her peers. The golden nameplate on her desk caught the sunlight. Sarah Johnson, Senior Marketing Executive. That morning was particularly special. After 3 long years of balancing full-time work and evening classes, Sarah had finally completed her MBA with honors from Columbia Business School. Her desk drawer held the diploma she'd received last weekend, still in its leather holder. She hadn't shown it to anyone yet, preferring to let her work speak for itself. "Hey Sarah, those campaign numbers from last quarter are incredible," Tom from accounting called out as he passed by her desk. Sarah smiled warmly, remembering how the youth education campaign she'd designed had exceeded their targets by 200%. It had been her idea to focus on social media platforms that actually resonated with young people, rather than the traditional approaches the company had been using. Sarah opened her laptop and began reviewing her presentation for the upcoming department meeting. The fresh strategy she'd developed for their newest client, a sustainable fashion brand, combined environmental consciousness with urban appeal. She had spent weeks researching market trends and consumer behavior, staying late at the office many nights to perfect every detail. As she worked, Sarah's mind drifted to her journey at Meridian Global Solutions. 5 years ago, she had started as a junior marketing associate, taking on every project she could get her hands on. While others complained about the extra work, Sarah saw each assignment as an opportunity to learn and grow. She had worked her way up through the ranks, earning every promotion through pure merit and dedication. What none of her colleagues knew was that she could have started at the top, as the daughter of David Johnson, the founder and CEO of Meridian Global Solutions. Sarah could have walked straight into an executive position, but both she and her father had agreed that wasn't the right path. Real respect is earned, not given, he had told her over dinner the night before her first day as a junior associate. The decision to keep her relationship to the CEO private hadn't been easy, but Sarah knew it was necessary. She wanted to be judged by her abilities, not her connections. Over the years, she had maintained her secret professionally, even using her mother's maiden name on her MBA application to avoid any special treatment. Looking around the office, Sarah felt proud of what she had built on her own merits. Her corner workspace was decorated with awards from various marketing competitions and thank you notes from satisfied clients. A small potted plant, a gift from her team after their successful holiday campaign, sat next to her dual monitors. The clock on her computer showed 9:45 a.m. The department meeting would start in 15 minutes, and Sarah knew this presentation could lead to her next big opportunity. There had been whispers about an opening for marketing director, and her track record made her a strong candidate. She gathered her materials and headed to the conference room, greeting colleagues along the way. As she walked, Sarah noticed a new face in the office, Mark Stevens, the recently hired middle manager from their competitor. He was standing by the water cooler, talking loudly about his previous successes. Sarah had heard through office gossip that he had strong opinions about traditional corporate culture and maintaining professional standards. She made a mental note to be extra prepared for any questions he might have during her presentation. Little did Sarah know that this ordinary Tuesday morning would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would not only test her professional resilience, but also challenge the very culture of Meridian Global Solutions. As she pushed open the conference room door, Sarah Johnson was about to face one of the biggest challenges of her career, one that would reveal not just her character, but the true colors of those around her. The conference room was packed by the time Sarah began her presentation. 20 pairs of eyes focused on her as she stood confidently at the front of the room, her slides displaying crisp graphics and market analysis for the sustainable fashion campaign. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the polished wooden table. As you can see from these numbers, Sarah explained, pointing to a chart, Gen Z consumers are willing to spend 30% more on sustainable products. Our campaign will target. Excuse me, Mark Stevens' voice cut through her presentation like a knife. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "But don't you think this is a bit unrealistic? I mean, given your background, how would you understand luxury market spending habits?" The room fell silent. Sarah maintained her professional composure, though she felt her heart rate quicken. "Actually, Mr. Stevens, these findings are based on 6 months of market research and focus groups." "Focus groups?" Mark laughed, glancing around the room as if sharing a private joke. "Let me tell you what really works in this industry. I've been doing this for 15 years at Preston and Burke." He stood up, walking to the front of the room uninvited. "Maybe in your community, sustainable fashion means something different, but our target demographic." Jennifer Chen, Sarah's direct supervisor, cleared her throat loudly. "Mark, Sarah has the floor. Please take your seat." But Mark wasn't finished. He waved his hand dismissively at Sarah's carefully prepared slides. "Look, I'm just trying to maintain our company's standards here. We can't risk our reputation on experimental approaches. Some of us had to work very hard to get where we are. We can't all rely on diversity quotas." Several gasps echoed around the room. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but years of navigating corporate spaces had taught her how to handle such moments. She straightened her spine and looked Mark directly in the eyes. "Mr. Stevens," she said, her voice steady and clear, "the data speaks for itself. Our previous campaign using similar strategies increased client revenue by 40%. If you'd like to review the full research report, I'd be happy to share it with you after the meeting." Mark's face reddened. "Now listen here." "That's enough, Mark." Jennifer stood up, her expression stern. "Sarah, please continue your presentation. The numbers are impressive, and I'd like to hear more about the social media strategy." For the next 15 minutes, Sarah delivered the rest of her presentation flawlessly, even as Mark muttered comments under his breath. She could see her colleagues' reactions. Some looked uncomfortable, others angry, and a few were furiously taking notes on their phones, documenting every inappropriate comment Mark made. After the meeting, people lingered in the conference room. Mark stormed out, bumping against Sarah's shoulder as he passed. "This isn't over," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Sarah, do you have a moment?" Jennifer asked, waiting until everyone else had left. She closed the door and turned to Sarah with concern in her eyes. "What happened today was completely unacceptable. I want you to know I'm documenting everything and taking this to HR immediately." Sarah nodded, finally allowing her shoulders to relax slightly. "Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate your support." "You handled that incredibly well," Jennifer said, shaking her head. "But you shouldn't have to handle it at all. Mark's behavior was textbook discrimination." Throughout the rest of the day, colleagues stopped by Sarah's desk to offer support. Tom from accounting brought her favorite coffee. Emily from creative sent a supportive email with screenshots she'd taken of Mark's worst moments. Even the usually quiet intern, Kevin, came by to tell her how much he'd learned from her presentation. As Sarah packed up her things that evening, she noticed an email from Jennifer confirming that an HR complaint had been filed. What Mark didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every discriminatory comment, every dismissive gesture, had been witnessed not just by the room, but would soon reach the desk of the CEO himself. Sarah drove home that evening with a mixture of emotions: anger, disappointment, determination, and a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this incident would lead to necessary changes at Meridian Global Solutions. Little did Mark Stevens know, his actions that day would set in motion events that would shake the company to its very foundation. The day after the incident, the atmosphere at Meridian Global Solutions felt different. Sarah arrived early as usual, but today, she noticed people watching her with a mix of sympathy and admiration. Her inbox was filled with supportive messages from colleagues who had witnessed Mark Stevens' behavior in the meeting. Jennifer Chen was already waiting at Sarah's desk when she arrived. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said quietly, gesturing toward one of the small conference rooms. "HR wants to meet with us at 10 a.m. Inside the conference room, Sarah and Jennifer found Maria Torres, the head of human resources, already seated with a thick folder in front of her. Her expression was serious as she adjusted her glasses. "First, Sarah, I want you to know that we're taking this very seriously," Maria began, opening her folder to reveal detailed notes. "We've already received 12 separate reports about yesterday's incident. That's unprecedented. Sarah nodded, surprised by the number. She hadn't realized how many of her colleagues had taken action. Maria continued spreading documents across the table, emails, meeting notes, and even screenshots of Mark's previous controversial comments in company chat groups. Tom from accounting sent over the recording of the meeting, Jennifer added. Like many companies, Meridian recorded meetings for documentation purposes. Mark can't deny any of it. As they discussed the events, Sarah noticed something strange. Maria and Jennifer kept exchanging meaningful glances, as if they knew something they couldn't share. What Sarah didn't realize was that both women had already received calls from David Johnson's office, though neither knew about Sarah's connection to him. There's more, Jennifer said carefully. 3 other employees have come forward with similar experiences involving Mark. It seems this wasn't an isolated incident. The meeting continued for an hour, with Maria taking detailed notes of Sarah's account. As they wrapped up, Maria paused, choosing her words carefully. The executive team will be reviewing this case personally. I can't say more, but I want you to know that changes are coming. Throughout the day, support came in various forms. Emily from Creative brought Sarah lunch from her favorite Thai restaurant. We can't let him win, Emily said firmly, placing the warm container on Sarah's desk. Your presentation was brilliant, by the way. That sustainable fashion campaign, pure genius. Even James, the quiet manager who rarely spoke to anyone, stopped by her desk. I've secured all the meeting recordings, he said in a low voice. Made multiple backups too, just in case. Around 3 p.m., Sarah received an unexpected visit from Patricia Martinez, one of the senior board members. Patricia was known for her no-nonsense attitude and fierce advocacy for workplace equality. Walk with me, Patricia said, not really a request. As they strolled through the office park outside, Patricia spoke frankly. I started here 30 years ago, when women of color in corporate leadership were even rarer than they are now. What happened yesterday? We're not letting it slide. Sarah listened as Patricia shared stories from her own career, battles fought and won, and the importance of standing firm. What Patricia didn't mention was the emergency board meeting scheduled for the next morning, or the fact that CEO David Johnson had called her personally about the situation. Back at her desk, Sarah noticed Mark Stevens walking through the office, his usual arrogant strut somewhat diminished. People deliberately turned away as he passed, and conversations fell silent. He had tried to schedule another department meeting, but mysteriously, everyone was booked solid. Near the end of the day, Kevin, the intern, rushed to Sarah's desk looking excited. You won't believe this, he whispered, glancing around. I was delivering mail to the executive floor, and I overheard something big is happening tomorrow. Like, really big. Sarah thanked him with a smile, not revealing that she already had a good idea what tomorrow might bring. Her father had texted her earlier. Having dinner at home tonight? It was their code for important family discussions. As she packed up to leave, Sarah caught her reflection in the office windows. She looked tired but determined. The weight of the past 2 days showed in her eyes, but there was also a glimmer of anticipation. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone at Meridian Global Solutions. What Mark Stevens and the others didn't know was that their CEO hadn't just heard about the incident. He had watched the entire recording, his daughter's composed response to blatant discrimination, and the subsequent rally of support from her colleagues. And David Johnson was not a man who took such matters lightly. The morning light had barely touched the Meridian Global Solutions building when David Johnson arrived at his office. At 62, the CEO's presence still commanded respect, his salt and pepper hair and tailored suit marking him as someone who had earned his success through decades of hard work. Today was different. David sat at his desk, watching the recording of the department meeting for the 3rd time. Each viewing made his blood boil more, but he maintained his composure. On his screen, you watched his daughter Sarah handle Mark Stevens' racist comments with grace and professionalism, the same grace her mother had shown facing similar challenges years ago. Sir, his assistant Linda poked her head in. Everyone's gathered in the main conference room as requested. Mr. Stevens seems quite nervous. David nodded, straightening his tie, and Sarah just arrived. She's at her desk, unaware of the meeting. Linda paused. Should I call her up too? Not yet, David replied. Let's handle the first part of this properly. The main conference room was packed. All department heads, senior managers, and board members sat around the massive oak table. Mark Stevens sat near the middle, his usual arrogance replaced by visible anxiety. The room fell silent as David Johnson entered. "Good morning," David began, his voice calm but carrying authority. "Yesterday, I received multiple reports about an incident that occurred in this building. Before we address it, I want to show you something." The large screen came to life, playing the recording of the department meeting. The room watched in uncomfortable silence as Mark Stevens' discriminatory behavior played out in high definition. Some people shifted in their seats, others glared at Mark, who had begun to sweat. When the video ended, David remained standing, his hands resting on the table. "I founded this company 30 years ago with a simple principle: merit above all else. Every person who walks through our doors deserves to be judged by their work, their ideas, their dedication. Nothing else." He pressed a button on his phone. "Linda, please ask Sarah Johnson to join us." The room waited in tense silence. Mark Stevens loosened his collar, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Moments later, Sarah entered, her professional demeanor intact despite her surprise at being called to an executive meeting. "Sarah," David said warmly, "please, take a seat." As Sarah sat down, David walked around the table slowly. Many of you know Sarah Johnson as one of our most talented marketing executives. Her campaigns have increased our revenue by millions. She earned her MBA while working full-time. Her recent sustainable fashion campaign strategy is brilliant. He paused behind Mark's chair. "What most of you don't know is that Sarah Johnson is my daughter." The revelation hit the room like a thunderbolt. Gasps and whispers erupted. Mark Stevens' face turned pale, his eyes darting between Sarah and David in horror. 5 years ago, David continued, Sarah chose to start at entry level, using her mother's maiden name professionally. She wanted to earn her success, not inherit it. Yesterday, Mr. Stevens, you questioned her understanding of our market. You suggested she was here because of diversity quotas. Mark began to stammer. "Mr. Johnson, I had no idea." "That's precisely the point." David cut him off. "You shouldn't need to know who someone's father is to treat them with respect. Sarah's work speaks for itself. The fact that she's my daughter doesn't make your behavior worse. It makes it exactly as unacceptable as it would be toward any employee." Sarah sat quietly, watching her colleagues process this information. Jennifer Chen smiled knowingly. She had suspected something when the CEO's office had called her so quickly about the incident. Today, David announced, "We're not just addressing one incident. We're making fundamental changes." He distributed folders to everyone present. Inside, you'll find our new comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiatives. Mark, you'll find your formal reprimand and the conditions for your continued employment, if you choose to accept them. The room buzzed with energy as people opened their folders. Sarah caught her father's eye and gave him a subtle nod of appreciation. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about setting a standard for the entire company. "One more thing," David added, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "Starting next month, Sarah will be heading our new merit advancement program. She's earned it, just like she's earned everything else in her career." The truth was out, and with it came the promise of real change at Meridian Global Solutions. Mark Stevens sat slumped in his chair, finally understanding the full magnitude of his actions. But this wasn't just about his downfall. It was about rising above prejudice and creating a workplace where merit truly mattered more than anything else. The next morning, Meridian Global Solutions buzzed with activity unlike anything before. News of Sarah's true identity and Mark Stevens' humiliation had spread through the office like wildfire. David Johnson had launched a company-wide investigation into workplace culture, and today was when it truly began. Maria Torres from HR had transformed the third-floor conference room into an investigation headquarters. Stacks of employee feedback forms covered the tables, and a large whiteboard displayed a timeline of reported incidents. She looked up as Sarah entered the room. "Perfect timing," Maria said, gesturing to a chair. "We'd already received over 200 responses to the workplace culture survey. People are finally speaking up." Sarah picked up one of the anonymous feedback forms and began reading. The stories made her heart sink. Other employees had faced similar discrimination, but had stayed silent out of fear. One account described how Mark had passed over a qualified Asian programmer for promotion, claiming she wouldn't fit the team dynamic. "There's more," Jennifer Chen said, walking in with a thick folder. "Remember Lisa from marketing who left last year? She just emailed me her resignation letter from back then." She had specifically mentioned Mark's behavior, but it was swept under the rug by his friend in middle management. David Johnson joined them an hour later, his face serious as he reviewed the growing evidence. "I should have done this investigation years ago," he admitted, rubbing his temples. "Sometimes we get so focused on business growth that we miss the rot spreading beneath the surface." As they worked through the documentation, Patricia Martinez burst into the room, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from rushing. "You all need to see this," she said, connecting her laptop to the room's screen. She pulled up a series of emails from Mark Stevens' corporate account. The emails revealed a disturbing pattern. Mark had been part of an informal group of managers who called themselves the Old Guard. They had been systematically undermining diverse candidates and employees, sharing inappropriate jokes, and even coordinating their feedback to prevent certain people from advancing. "This goes deeper than just Mark," Sarah said quietly, reading through the emails. "It's an entire network." David stood up, pacing the room. "Then we'll root out the entire network. Maria, I want a complete audit of all promotion decisions from the past 3 years. Jennifer, gather performance reviews. Let's look for patterns. Patricia, work with legal to review our policies." Sarah watched as the investigation expanded. Employee after employee came forward, sharing stories they'd kept hidden for years. The Old Guard had created an invisible barrier that had held back countless talented individuals. Around lunchtime, Kevin the intern knocked on the conference room door, carrying a stack of papers. I think these might help," he said nervously. "I've been keeping a journal of everything I've noticed since I started here. The way certain managers treat different interns. I thought I was just being paranoid, but maybe not." The journal proved invaluable, providing dates, times, and specific incidents that helped connect the dots. Sarah realized that sometimes the most important observations came from those who seemed to be watching from the sidelines. By late afternoon, the picture had become clear. Mark Stevens wasn't an anomaly, he was a symptom of a larger problem. The investigation had uncovered systematic bias in hiring, promotions, and project assignments. But it had also revealed something else. A strong core of employees who had been quietly documenting, supporting each other, and waiting for a chance to speak up. "Sarah," David called her aside as the day was winding down. "I owe you an apology. When you insisted on starting from the bottom, I thought it was just about proving yourself. Now I understand. You saw things I couldn't see from up here." Sarah squeezed her father's hand. "We can't change the past," she said, "but we can make sure the future is different." As they prepared to wrap up the day's investigation, Maria handed out new documents to the team. "These are the draft proposals for structural changes," she explained. "New reporting systems, anonymous feedback channels, regular culture audits, and mandatory training programs." The sun was setting outside the conference room windows, casting long shadows across the evidence of years of discrimination. But there was also hope in that room, hope in the form of action plans, policy changes, and the determined faces of people ready to transform their workplace. What had started as one manager's racist outburst had cracked open a door that couldn't be closed again. Meridian Global Solutions was about to undergo the biggest transformation in its history, and Sarah Johnson would be at the forefront of that change. Not because she was the CEO's daughter, but because she had earned her place there, one difficult day at a time. 1 week after the investigation began, David Johnson called for another company-wide meeting. This time, the largest conference room at Meridian Global Solutions wasn't just full, it was overflowing. People stood along the walls, and the IT team had set up video feeds in 3 overflow rooms. The clock struck 10 a.m. when David Johnson walked in, followed by Sarah, Maria Torres from HR, and the board of directors. Mark Stevens sat in the front row, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usual expensive suit appeared wrinkled, and his confidence had vanished completely. "Good morning," David began, his voice firm but controlled. "Over the past week, we've uncovered things about our company that disturb me deeply. Not just as your CEO, but as a human being." He clicked a button, and the screen behind him came to life. Charts and graphs appeared, showing clear patterns of discrimination in promotions and project assignments. These numbers tell a story, David continued. A story of talented people being pushed aside, of voices being silenced, a potential being wasted. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. Sarah watched as her colleagues' faces showed different emotions: shame from some, vindication from others, and determination from many. Mr. Stevens, David said, turning to face Mark directly. Would you care to explain this email chain? On the screen appeared messages from the Old Guard group, their discriminatory contents now exposed for everyone to see. Mark stood up shakily. Mr. Johnson, I can explain. Please do. David interrupted. Explain why you and your friends thought it was acceptable to mock employees' accents in private messages. Explain why you labeled certain resumes as culture risks based on candidates' names. Explain why you felt threatened by my daughter's success, even before you knew she was my daughter. Mark's face turned red. It was just workplace banter. We were maintaining professional standards. You can't blame us for wanting to protect the company's image. Protect. Sarah stood up, her voice clear and strong. Let me tell you about protection, Mr. Stevens. Last year, Lisa from marketing protected herself by quitting rather than face daily harassment. Kevin the intern protected himself by documenting every discriminatory comment he heard. Emily from creative protected herself by taking screenshots of every inappropriate message. She walked to the front of the room, but true protection isn't about hiding from problems. It's about confronting them, making changes, ensuring everyone has a fair chance to succeed. David nodded at his daughter, then turned back to the room. Today, we're announcing major changes. First, the entire Old Guard management team will be required to attend comprehensive sensitivity and inclusion training. Those who refuse will be asked to resign. He clicked to the next slide. We're implementing new hiring and promotion protocols with diverse panels making decisions. We're creating an anonymous reporting system, and we're establishing a review board to examine past complaints that were ignored. Mark Stevens stood up again, this time angry. This is ridiculous. You can't just change everything because of one incident. One incident. Patricia Martinez's voice cut through the room like steel. She stood up from her seat on the board. I have here 17 documented complaints against you personally, Mr. Stevens. Complaints that your friends and management conveniently buried. Should I read them aloud? Mark fell silent, slumping back into his chair. This isn't about punishment, David continued. It's about growth. Change. Building a better company. He looked around the room. Some of you may not like these changes. You may find them uncomfortable or unnecessary. To you, I say this. Meridian Global Solutions will no longer be a comfortable place for discrimination. If that bothers you, there's the door. Sarah watched as a few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But many more sat up straighter, their eyes bright with hope and determination. Starting today, David announced, Sarah Johnson will lead our new Workplace Culture and Merit Advancement Division. Not because she's my daughter. Her identity was kept secret during the selection process. She earned this role through her demonstrated leadership, insight, and commitment to fairness. As the meeting concluded, people began filing out, talking in excited whispers about the changes ahead. Mark Stevens remained in his chair, staring at the ground, his world completely transformed. Sarah caught her father's eye and smiled. This confrontation wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. The real work of transforming Meridian Global Solutions was just starting, and she was ready for the challenge. 2 weeks after the confrontational meeting, Meridian Global Solutions had begun its transformation. The 15th floor, once home to executive offices, had been converted into the new Workplace Culture and Merit Center. Sarah Johnson sat in her new office, reviewing the progress report spread across her desk. Mark Stevens stood outside her door, waiting for his scheduled meeting. Gone was his designer suit, replaced by business casual attire that matched his new position. The demotion to junior analyst had been a bitter pill to swallow, but it was either this or resignation. Come in, Mr. Stevens, Sarah called, her voice professional and neutral. As he entered, she noticed how different he looked, humbled, perhaps even a little ashamed. Please, sit down, she gestured to the chair across from her desk. Let's review your first 2 weeks of sensitivity training. Mark pulled out his progress folder with slightly trembling hands. I've completed all the assigned modules, he said quietly. And I've been working with Dr. Rodriguez, the diversity consultant. Sarah opened her own copy of his progress report. The notes from Dr. Rodriguez were detailed. Mr. Stevens shows initial resistance but growing understanding, particularly impacted by role reversal exercises and personal stories from colleagues. Tell me what you've learned, Sarah said, putting down the report and looking directly at him. Mark was quiet for a moment. I never thought about how it felt on the other side, he began. In training, they had us listen to recordings of our own comments played back to us. It was uncomfortable. I really heard myself, for the first time. Sarah nodded, remembering how Dr. Rodriguez had described this breakthrough moment. Continue. Yesterday, Lisa, the marketing manager who quit last year, she came back as a guest speaker in our training. Mark's voice cracked slightly. She described how her children would ask her why she was crying after work. I have kids too. The thought of someone making my daughters feel that way. He paused, collecting himself. I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry, and I want to do better. Sarah pulled out another document. Your team has provided feedback on your progress. Kevin, who you once dismissed as just an intern, says you've started actually reading his project proposals. Emily notes that you've stopped interrupting women in meetings. These are small steps, but important ones. Outside the office, the new Merit Center was buzzing with activity. Through the glass walls, Sarah could see diverse teams working together, attending workshops, and engaging in honest discussions about workplace culture. The change was visible, tangible. Mr. Stevens, Sarah continued, you're not the only one learning. Our entire company is learning. Yesterday, we had 5 former employees contact us about returning. They saw our changes on LinkedIn and want to be part of the transformation. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. Do you know why we didn't fire you, Mr. Stevens? Why we offered this chance at redemption? Mark shook his head. Because true change isn't just about punishing wrong behavior. It's about transforming it. You'd held significant influence in this company. Now you can use that experience to influence positive change instead. Sarah returned to her desk and pulled out a new document. Starting next month, as part of your rehabilitation program, you'll be sharing your story with other companies. You'll talk about what you learned, how you changed, and why it matters. Your first presentation will be at the Corporate Leadership Conference. Mark's eyes widened. You want me to publicly admit everything? Accountability isn't just private, Mr. Stevens. Real change requires real honesty. As Mark left her office, Sarah saw her father watching from the doorway. David Johnson entered, looking proud but also thoughtful. How's that reform program going? He asked, sitting down. Better than expected, Sarah replied. The old guard members who stayed are actually making progress. Those who resigned, well, their LinkedIn profiles show they're having trouble finding new positions. Companies are more aware now. David nodded. Your mother would be proud, you know. She always said change comes not from pushing people down, but from lifting them up to see a better way. Sarah smiled, picking up the next file on her desk. It was a proposal for expanding their reform program to other companies, sharing their learning and transformation process. The path to change wasn't easy, but Meridian Global Solutions was proving that accountability, when paired with opportunity for growth, could transform not just individuals, but entire corporate cultures. 6 months had passed since the day Mark Stevens made his discriminatory comments in that fateful meeting. The Meridian Global Solutions building looked the same from the outside, but inside, everything had changed. Sarah Johnson stood at the podium of the National Business Leadership Conference, facing an audience of over 1,000 corporate leaders from across the country. The spotlight shone on her as she prepared to deliver the keynote speech about her company's transformation. 6 months ago, Sarah began, her voice clear and confident. I was a marketing executive facing discrimination in my workplace. Today, I stand before you not just as the head of our merit advancement program, but as living proof that change is possible. In the audience, she could see her father, David Johnson, sitting proudly in the front row. Behind him sat Jennifer Chen, Maria Torres, and even Mark Stevens, all there to support the message of transformation. Our company's story went viral, Sarah continued, clicking to show headlines on the screen behind her. But this isn't just about one racist manager or one brave employee. It's about creating lasting change in corporate America. She shared the statistics that made other CEOs in the audience sit up straighter. Employee satisfaction up by 60%, productivity increased by 45%, and diversity in leadership positions had doubled. The company's revenue had grown by 35% since implementing the new inclusive policies. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Sarah said, gesturing to the side of the stage. I'd like to invite Mark Stevens to join me. Mark walked onto the stage, no longer the arrogant manager he had been 6 months ago. He stood at the second podium, facing the audience with humility. My name is Mark Stevens, he began, his voice steady. 6 months ago, I was the villain in this story. Today, I'm here to tell you about my journey from being part of the problem to becoming part of the solution. The audience listened intently as Mark described his transformation, the training, the self-reflection, and the hard work of changing deeply ingrained beliefs. Several people wiped tears from their eyes as he shared stories of employees he had hurt and how he was working to make amends. After Mark's powerful testimony, Sarah returned to the podium. Change isn't just about policies and procedures, she explained. It's about creating a culture where everyone can thrive. At Meridian, we've implemented what we call the Merit Matters program. She clicked through slides showing their new initiatives: blind resume screening, diverse interview panels, mentorship programs, and regular cultural competency training. The audience took furious notes as Sarah shared practical steps for implementing similar changes in their own companies. But our proudest achievement, Sarah said, smiling, is our corporate reform network. She revealed their latest project, a partnership with 50 other major companies to share resources, training programs, and success stories in creating inclusive workplaces. From his seat, David Johnson watched his daughter with pride. The company he had built was becoming something even greater under her influence. He noticed other CEOs nodding along with her words, some already pulling out their phones to schedule meetings with their HR departments. Near the end of her speech, Sarah shared a personal moment. My father, our CEO, once told me that real respect is earned, not given. That's why I started at the bottom of our company, using my mother's maiden name. What I learned is that respect isn't just about individual achievement. It's about creating an environment where everyone has a fair chance to earn it. The conference hall erupted in applause as Sarah concluded her speech. As people stood for a standing ovation, Lisa, the employee who had quit and later returned, rushed onto the stage with exciting news. Their story had just been picked up by a major news network, and companies across the globe were reaching out to learn from their example. In the following reception, Sarah found herself surrounded by business leaders eager to implement similar changes. Mark Stevens stood nearby, sharing his perspective with a group of managers about the importance of confronting their own biases. You've started something remarkable, David said, joining his daughter at the refreshment table. This is bigger than Meridian now. Sarah smiled, watching the room full of influential people discussing real, meaningful change. Sometimes, she replied, it takes one moment of darkness to help us see the light. What happened 6 months ago was terrible, but look at the change it sparked. As the evening wound down, Sarah looked out at the city skyline from the conference center's windows. In offices across those buildings, people faced the same challenges she had faced. But now, thanks to their story and their example, change was coming. Real, lasting change that would open doors for countless others walking the same path she had walked. The incident with a racist manager had become more than a story of personal triumph. It had become a catalyst for transformation in corporate America. And this was just the beginning.